Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. We live in a culture where we measure ourselves constantly, and our whole self-worth is tied up in, do we measure up? And so if we need to measure up, if we so desperately need to measure up, we have to have goals. And so people, and this is pretty much everyone I've ever met in the United States at some point in their development, people who are afraid that they don't measure up and feel that accomplishments will satisfy that anxiety. When they encounter spiritual life, when they encounter a teacher or practices or a tradition, if the tradition presents them with accomplishments, especially ones organized into a hierarchy, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, this kind of samadhi, that kind of samadhi, and then the highest samadhi, level 1, level 2, level 3, they will go for that. They will go for that because they think it's going to resolve their anxiety about themselves. And there's so little opportunity to receive teachings that are not based on some kind of sense of accomplishment or mission, that everybody is, in a sense, or most people are falling prey to this in their spiritual traditions, even if it's subtle. So, for instance, I heard a teacher, this was an in-person talk that I went to by this person, telling people that his students and he were on the vanguard of civilization and they were expanding consciousness and blah, blah, blah. So this is like crack to people in our Titan culture, right? And it's interesting because this person is a very well-respected scholar, been around for a long time, has written some things that I really appreciated too, but could not let in the actual view, which doesn't support any such mission, not at all. So we are really addicted to this sense of accomplishment and mission, and this is the worst kind of spiritual materialism. So then when we get into our practice, if we don't have teachers who are going to determinedly steer us away from this, then we can get into this situation where it is really narcissism. Narcissism is basically like the 20th, 21st century version of Titan realm, where it just becomes all about us and our accomplishments, and not about kindness and modesty and open-heartedness, not about surrender, not about following. And of course, there's also a form of narcissism, aka Titan realm, where it sounds like someone is on board with all of those good things like open-heartedness, but it is really all just banner waving. That can happen too. So it is very, very, very hard. It's very hard to get out of this feeling that if you don't accomplish something, you're failing. And it's very hard to get that out of your spiritual life too. So this is how we get into these situations where people are going along in their practice. They don't have teachers who are basically wise enough to this pattern and who haven't dealt with it in themselves. And everyone's on board with some great mission or great thing that either to collectively or as solo practitioners. And so the heart just goes out of everything, right? The heart just goes out of everything. And this tradition, Trika, is solely focused on the heart. That's what's so wonderful about it. And if we miss that, if it all becomes about energy and my kundalini rising and taking a light body and having a lot of students and being the best this and the best that, and on top of that, and on level this and stage that, we have completely missed the point. And all we're doing is recapitulating what U.S. culture has given us in our spiritual life. And it's heartless. It really is heartless. But again, I do sympathize. It's like very, very difficult to get out of this because we are just like saturated in it. In order to really do a tradition like this in a more authentic way, we have to be apprentices. We have to be followers, not leaders. We have to be collaborators with nature, not feeling like we want to be in control of nature. We have to take our shoes off and walk barefoot, and we have to have a tender feeling toward the whole concept of modesty. That's what this is about. I've had some extremely inspiring teachers in this regard, some like very deeply modest teachers. But I've also had some teachers for whom the word modesty never left their lips, nor following. And from them, I just learned from the negative example that they presented me with. It just takes a lot to reorient ourselves. It's like turning around something that has a lot of momentum. And it's a lot of work, but it is so worth it.
Something you said to me recently really just went straight home, and I've been reflecting on a lot about how we forget in our culture that we can aspire to something that we may never attain,
Yeah.
But just aspiring is a beautiful thing. And being reminded of that has, I don't know, it's created a big shift in my just feeling of devotion, basically. Like I can feel devotion and feel aspiration and not think that there's something wrong, that there's such a huge gap between my desire and my capacity or my...
That's wonderful. When I heard from my teachers stories about their experiences as practitioners, I always felt really moved and inspired. And I've heard occasionally, this isn't, a widespread phenomenon, but I've heard occasionally from my own students that when I share my spiritual experience from my life, they feel like I'm engaging in some kind of competition with them. Right? Or they feel badly because they feel they'll never have that experience, or something like that. And I think this is like an aspect of this culture where you can't even hear about someone else's success on the same path you're on and be moved by it. You suddenly, get your hackles up. That really surprised me. I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm very naive, but I'm really glad to hear that. I always try to say, none of us are ever going to be totally enlightened, and who even knows what that means. And yet we can aspire. I aspire to be like Ma, but I have absolutely zero thought that I will ever be like her. I just aspire, and in aspiring, I know I'm being my best self, whatever that is, warts and all. I love that quote from Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche, mistaking, I follow the unmistaken path. That is just so beautiful. I think that's how we should orient ourselves, that we're just stumbling along, but we can aspire, that the examples of those who have gone before us is to draw the longing out from us to aspire. But we should also have a kind of a humorous attitude towards our own aspirations, knowing that we're just basically klutzes. Right? I mean, that's what's so great about Ma. She's so far and away not what I will ever achieve. You could not think that you were ever going to be like Anandamayi Ma, right? That's like fantastic, because then we can just have that aspiration, and we know we're constantly not that, but it's fine. We're just doing our best.
It feels so apprenticey, like that there could be all these little wonderful discoveries along the way. And it's sometimes when people talk about enlightenment, it seems so black and white. Like, we're totally schlubs, and then we get to where Ma is at. And the whole thing is that there's like all these different things that are happening, even in super subtle ways or ordinary ways or whatever along the way. And it's just nice to think about aspiring in a non-Titan way, in an exploratory, sort of hopeful, uplifting way.
And just being grateful at whatever wisdom decides to share with you. However small or however great. Yeah, that way of narrating spiritual life is also part of realm vision, karmic realm vision, right? Just from narratives about the one experience you're going to have that means you're enlightened. This is just ignorance. This is just not how things happen for 99.999999999% of people. When I say ignorance, I don't mean anything pejorative. As Abhinavagupta says, ignorance means lack of access to wisdom, which we all have in some measure. So there isn't a single person on earth who doesn't have some lack of access to wisdom. So there's absolutely nothing pejorative about it. But if someone has some one experience and then they say they're enlightened, that is lack of access to wisdom. And of course, in our Titan culture, if you get to go around saying that your teacher is enlightened because they had some one experience or two experiences or something, that's part of your Titan armor, right? So there's so much that we need to drop, really.
I was wondering about aspiration. How is aspiration? It seems a little bit tricky to me because it seems as if it's putting attachment in something that is indicative that you feel like you are not complete. So where's that balance?
Mm-hmm. You do feel like that you're not complete. That's part of how we come into the world. And the reason that we feel we're not complete is because we don't have full knowledge of who we really are. We don't have full knowledge of the self or of reality or God. All means the same thing. So that feeling of incompletion gives rise to longing, and longing gives rise to aspiration. So aspiration is kind of a little bit of a takeoff from longing, right? And this is absolutely the engine of spiritual life. If we didn't feel any, for instance, this is the example I always give. If we didn't know about chocolate, we wouldn't look for chocolate and we wouldn't long for chocolate, right? But we'd be missing out on chocolate. So the situation that we're in is not that. We do, in some even inarticulable way, remember who we are. We have some feeling that there's more to life than we can see. We have some feeling that there's just more. And that's this fundamental feeling of lack. One of the ways it's called in this tradition, Trika Shaivism, is anavamala. It means our root experience of separation. Separation is not our real condition, but it is our real experience. So we come in, most of us, feeling more or less separate from others, from life, etc. Those of us that are experiencing extreme separation are what we call people with mental illness. Those of us experience extreme continuity with all of life are the people we call enlightened. And then the rest of us are somewhere in the middle. So we come in with this experience of separation and we have a longing to reconnect. So we are missing the knowledge of and immersion in our unity, our unison with all of life, with all of nature, including all other people and things. We're all part of nature. So that feeling of separation, out of that gap arises longing. The voice of God is longing, and that fuel of longing. And then out of that, an aspiration to reconnect, to reintegrate with life, to discover who we really are, or just discover what the heck's going on here. As I've said many times, since I was a little girl, I just felt, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what's really going on here. And I wanted to know. That was a very profound longing that I've had my whole life, to just really grok what's going on with reality and us. And that's driven me. So that's what I mean by aspiration. The object is wisdom. Now, when we don't know that, we still feel separate and we still feel incomplete and we still have longing, but we haven't yet discovered the proper object of longing, which is wisdom or contact with God or re-immersion in nature. So, or the end of a feeling of separation. So we long for all kinds of other things: a romance, a car, a house, a job, an accomplishment, our childhood, our future. We're filled with longing all the time, or desires, but we haven't identified the real object of our desire. And that real object of our desire is unification with life. We already are actually in total continuity with everything. We just have forgotten that. So we're not actually trying to reconnect literally, because there's no way we could be disconnected. Separation is only an experience. It's not how things actually are. We're just trying to remove those obscurations that prevent us from directly knowing for ourselves who we are and how we are always in continuity with everything. And then when we discover that, then that longing eventually ceases, in that form anyway.